introduction. The late ones will join very shortly. But so good afternoon to everybody, and welcome to the Alliance of Independent Agencies, zooming in great luminaries. And I'm delighted we've got today Bruce Daisley. Since the Alliance rebranded from the MAG on the 1st of September, we've built an organisation around 3 pillars of people, purpose and performance. And all of this has been very much in the making from our MAG days, when we recognised that people were vital. If you get the people right in your business and then you get the purpose right, then performance comes from it. And so therefore, I'm delighted that we've got Bruce with us today, who has become, in my book, a kind of a guru on not just the joy of working, but everything about building cultures and teams and how we organise our working lives. For those of you who don't know Bruce, he is a best-selling author and he's technology leader. He was at Twitter for 8 years, where he was the most senior person in Twitter outside of America, and he was also at YouTube UK. So he's was very much at the forefront of social media, which has been both a great asset in our lives and also probably a great pain in our lives to the way in which we work. And Bruce has kind of taken on this mantle in terms of identifying the joy of work that we will kind of go into. And I'm very interested in some of his stories because I've been immersing myself in the world of Bruce Daisley over the last week or so. And I actually think he's got a bit of a mellifluous voice. So I think Birmingham should be very pleased of one of its great sons, because it just kind of flows over. So I would really encourage all of you to listen to his podcasts of Eat, Sleep, Work and Repeat, and sign up to the newsletter as well, which really goes to show how you can make work better. So the way we're going to do this is going to be an interactive session after Bruce has kind of taken us through his thoughts and the research that he's been doing in terms of making work better. And he's also been very much driven, going to be focusing on how COVID has changed the way in which some of the thinking has moved on. But what I really want to start with you, Bruce, is why did you kind of pivot from having what to many of us would be the great dream job in terms of running a great organization like Twitter to giving over yourself to something which is, psychologically an onslaught, but actually putting us into the joy of work? What brought you to this stage?
You presume too much of a master plan there. So you're definitely overestimating your audience. Like, so the first thing is why have I got an interest in workplace culture? I grew up in a council estate in Birmingham, and my first experience of work was I worked in fast food restaurants, bars, restaurants, and there was a strange thing where, certainly as a really shy 16-year-old, shy 17-year-old, there were some places you joined and you were like, oh my God, I'm not sure I can handle this. This is too much. And there were other places you joined and you just thought, wow, what an incredible collective energy. And are they just hiring the good people at this place and the awful people at that place? And so I was always interested in like this sort of the mojo of different organizations. And it went on when I first started my career, I got my job by sending a cartoon CV. Got rejected from loads of places, unemployed in Birmingham. I sent my cartoon CV to a series of record companies, and I was desperate to work in I loved pop music, so I was desperate to work in record companies. And even though I didn't get a job from that, I got offered one, failed my driving test. Different story. That sort of made me realise that there was some benefit in in doing the cartoon TV, and I ended up in media. And what I discovered is that a lot of the things that characterized great jobs in restaurants characterized great jobs in advertising. There were some really good places and some places that just didn't have the same energy. So I became fascinated with it. Anyway, fast forward, and I get the opportunity to go and work at tech firms, Google, right? And you know what happens. Anyone who's got kids or anyone who knows teenagers will know that kids are searching best places to work, and lo and behold, Google comes up as the best place to work. So I thought, well, this is like going into Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. I've always been interested in good workplace cultures, and I'm going into the best place. Let me tell you, that was not my experience. Albeit a very impressive group of people, but what you discover very quickly that a lot of what you see on the outside from tech firms that you think is culture is marketing. So anytime that you know someone who works at a tech firm or goes to a tech firm and you see them in the old days with a sort of a plate overburdened with steak or with this exquisite sushi collection, you're not looking at culture, you're looking at marketing. Anytime you see someone going into an office and they're cascading down a neon colored slide, you're not looking at culture, you're looking at marketing. But these firms were very good at appropriating those things. So I found myself, I set up Twitter in the UK, went from, a handful of us to several hundred people. But along the way, what happened to me was the culture went. I was fortunate. I was able to build the culture and the promise that you'd seen. I was able to build a good culture, but along the way, the culture went spectacularly wrong. In 1 year, 40% of the team quit. A lot of them were quitting with no job to go to. What you discover in a situation like that is it ruins you, because every Thursday was a leaving do. These things that we long for these days, long forgotten relics of a different era. But you're always surrounded with this, and I thought, right, okay. I had a good culture here. People had said it was a great place to work. Now I've messed it up. I want to rebuild it. And what I did is I started finding myself reading everything that was about good workplace culture. I started doing a podcast on it, a sort of a process of self-education, just thinking, okay, we had something that was good here and I've totally messed it up. And what you start learning is there's loads of evidence of how to make good workplace environments. There's loads of secrets of these things, just none of it reaches people in jobs. So there was no intentional plan. But what happened was the book did all right. I make a bit of money off the podcast. And I got to the end of 8 years at Twitter, very exhausting working at those tech firms. And I thought, you know what, I just quite fancy having a go. I didn't know whether I was going to set up a workplace culture company or what I was going to do. And then this tsunami of COVID hit us this year. So I've spent most of this year actually sort of dialing in, sometimes to things like this, sometimes dialing in, helping companies work out what their plan is going to be going forwards. Sometimes just providing sort of a little bit of advice. So there was no master plan. I've sort of done it step by step along the way, really.
So what do you think has been one of the great learnings from COVID? Because a lot of the work that you've been doing before was talking about management structures and I mean, too many meetings and things like that. And all of a sudden we started working remotely. And where do you think some of those changes that we'll be staying with have come out of COVID? And what is it that, should we be looking upon this as a time when seeds have been sown, which allow us to put some joy in the workplace? That statistic that we work 90,000 hours in our lives, but only 13% of us are actually engaged in what we do. So there seems an awful lot of time for very little return. So are there going to be any positives that come out of this?
Yeah, I mean, look, you asked a lot of questions there. So let me try and sort of pick off the critical things. So firstly, what do we know about this? It seems like the firms who, and look, it's only the benefit of hindsight, but the firms who originally said this is till the end of the year, now saying this is till the middle of next year. The firms that sort of had that foresight, who then took the short-term anxiety away from their teams, people thinking, I don't want to total granny by getting on the central line. People who sort of recognize that, organizations that recognize that they allowed their teams to sort of relax in the short term and we're going to deal with this in the long term. They seem to have been proven right. And the critical thing, I think, what that allows them to do is start thinking about what's going to happen. I think a lot of us probably went into this lockdown in March thinking it was, 4 weeks. We left our plants on our desks. We left some food in our drawers. We headed home. And because it just didn't seem like it could conceivably last 9 months, the idea that we'd be sitting here now, for first year on record, that there's sort of no Christmas lunches, and none of us conceived that it was going to be the case at that stage. But the organisations that sort of kicked the can down the road have freed themselves for doing it. What do we know about the evidence? What we know about the evidence is 85% of people don't want to go back to working full time in the office. Broadly, when we look at the evidence of that, it's sort of, we want our cake and eating it, because we don't want to go back full time in the office, but we are kind of missing people. Sort of this strange duality. We hold conflicting opinions at the same time. But broadly, what you get from it is people say, in hindsight, a lot of us sort of, I take a step back, a lot of us often start the year, that reflective mode that we all have on January 1st. And we all often say, we say, I'm going to spend less time on my phone. And we often sort of find ourselves in a situation where we're like, I've got an unhealthy relationship with my screen. But very few of us ever thought, I've got an unhealthy relationship with my workplace. The fact that we were tearing across Southeast England or wherever we're based for an hour and a half in the mornings, then tearing home in the evenings. It was sort of collective insanity when we look at it now, but it's only from the benefit of where we are that we can look at that. So I think it's why a lot of people are saying, I'd really value working around my colleagues in the office 3 days a week. Maybe for some people it's 4 days, whatever, but having that balance. And so I suspect we're going to go to that environment. 2/3 of CEOs say they expect their office to be smaller going forwards than it is. So there does seem to be something where there's a collective recognition that something's changed. And there's interesting consequences of that. So one of the consequences of that is that the office had a network effect to it. And we can learn some of this. I've given you a health warning about not believing everything that tech firms say. But what we can say is that some tech firms have learned some lessons, some mistakes that we can know. So there's a sort of second generation of tech firms, of Silicon Valley firms, that went remote only for a period before this all happened. Largely, there were firms like Automatic, the firm that makes WordPress, or Basecamp, a software firm. And what they did, generally, they started with offices, but they were in this arms race against the big boys, against how can you compete with the food at Facebook. And so what they started to do was say, okay, well, here's what we do here. And they allowed people to work remotely whenever they wanted. And they had beautiful offices. So they had like an office like the Apple Store, but you could work from home from whenever you wanted. Basecamp are based in Chicago. What they discovered was people would make the journey in and they'd get to the office. And, the benefit of the office, like I say, it had the network effect. The big boss was there. The person who dealt with international markets was there. Research and development was there. All those people were around that you could pick the brains of, until you allowed people to work from home whenever they wanted. You'd make the journey in. You'd sort of brave the highways of Chicago. You'd get all the way there, and there was no one there. And so the next time that you thought, shall I venture in? I saw someone tweeting a month ago. He said, I've realized it was costing me 50 quid a day to get to London. And now I'm sitting there thinking, man, was it worth 50 quid each day for that? Well, that's what happens when you remove the network effect of the office. When you get there and the big boss isn't there, the research development person isn't there, actually the only thing you can do is have a Microsoft Teams meeting, a Zoom call with someone who's back at their home. Then you start thinking, well, what's the point? Now, it gets to the question, what was the office for? Well, the office was broadly for four things. It was good for meeting people by appointment, good for meeting people by accident, it was often a workshop. If you had creative people and they had big screens, or if you've got someone who, designs visual imagery, big kit is often much better in the workshop of the office. And the final part is it was good for team cohesion. It made us feel together, getting everyone crammed into that meeting room, made you feel like you're in a sort of collective endeavor. And I think for the first time, people are going to be in a cost benefit analysis. They're going to be saying, my firm wants me in 5 days a week. I chatted to someone in national press. He said to me about a month ago, he said, as soon as we got a vaccine, 5 days a week back in the office. And I think what that mistakes is that people in that team will be saying, okay, it's cost me 50 quid a day, probably more in some cases, to get into the office. And all I did was answer emails. I was on Teams meetings. I might look for something else. Or that firm, they're trying to hire people. The new norm is, I'm certain of it, going to be that most firms allow people to work from home a couple of days a week. Up for debate. I'm not creating the rules. I'm trying to sort of read the tea leaves of what everyone seems to be saying. And what firms will find is they'll find that, okay, they actually decide that they want people in the office 5 days a week. When they try and hire a new hotshot talent, they've got a big gap they want to fill, big job they want to fill, try and hire someone. They'll go out into the job market. Best candidate will be in front of them, and she'll say, how many days a week can I work from home? And they'll say, oh yeah, we're a 5 day a week in the office. And she'll say, the evidence is really clear on this. She'll say, I'm fine, actually. I'm happy where I am. So we forget that, two things. The office has a network effect, and the job in the job sector we're in is a market. We don't always call the shots ourselves. But the network effect, I think, is the really critical thing, because firms will, I suspect, as we come out of this, and maybe, I can't help but be filled with with optimism for all of the news over the last week. And, if there is a vaccine, then maybe we're back at our desks in the spring, or, maybe sort of the early summer. There's going to be a period where a lot of firms are going to be saying, let's start experimenting. But we're going to start experimenting, and there are going to be rules that underpin this. So the rules are going to be, this team's in Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. This team's going to be, and maybe if you've got a new business team, or you've got a sales team, if you're a media owner or whatever, we're going to have a sales team in on Monday and Friday. Now, of course, challenge is, do those need to intersect at all? If you've got customer meetings, how are they going to intersect? So there's going to be a bit of working things out. But I think there's going to be a spirit of experimentation. One thing we don't want to lose, we don't want to lose that network effect of when the office was good. And that sense of team cohesion that the office created, we're going to be really keen to keep it. So, there's a degree of narrative fallacy about the way that we look at things. One of the narrative fallacies, we construe everything as a story. But one of the mistakes is we believe we're at the end of the story. We're not even at the beginning of the end of the first act. So there's going to be a whole load of extra change. But the interesting thing, I think, is that, some organizations are going to be starting to think, right, we know that good culture, you mentioned there, people, purpose, performance. We know that good culture can be our superpower versus the big boys, can be our superpower versus the faceless big bureaucracies. So how do we bring some of that superpower to what we're building in the future? And I think that's the interesting challenge.
Okay, so you talked about the environment, but I'm really interested in terms of, you talk, your book about the joy of work, but what makes work rewarding? Because when you talk about the 40% that were leaving Twitter, and you looked into it, your findings about what made work rewarding were quite interesting, because it was about achievement. A good day was when things got achieved, and how do you set those goals? So what makes work rewarding for people?
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because I suspect if you ask most bosses and you said to them, is your job fun? They go, yeah, it's really good fun. Most bosses would say it's good fun. And probably when we've had good jobs that we reflect upon, we say, yeah, it's hard, but it was good fun. But when we look at the jobs of the people around us, whether it's maybe you're a bourgeois person like me and you've got a cleaner, or maybe it's like the people who work for you, we don't expect their jobs to be fun, and actually their jobs shouldn't be fun. But when we get some degree of a reward path, when we get some degree of sense of accomplishment, it's when we feel that our jobs are are good jobs. So I think that the notion that we would go to work and we would do something and have no sense of accomplishment from it, normally that correlates with, you mentioned only 13% of people are engaged in their jobs, and that correlates with the vast majority of those people who do feel disconnected and do feel disempowered from their jobs. I think the opportunity presented with everyone on this call is that you do want to differentiate the experience of your working environment from working at sort of one of your faceless competitors. And having a degree of reward to jobs is really critical. So you mentioned that piece of research. It was done by a researcher called Teresa Amabile, and she said that a good day at work, not like a revelation once you hear it, but it was the biggest diary survey ever conducted of people at work, and people said a good day at work is when they made progress in something meaningful. I mean, it's so simple. Of course, that's obviously the case. But then you look at what our jobs have actually become. And quite often our jobs are a series of Zoom calls or a series of emails. We get to the end of the day and we've got that itchiness that we've got nothing done, but we know we've got a full inbox. And I think, the more that we can try to empower our teams to feel like they can get things done, I think the more that we can get some reward. And you mentioned, so what went wrong at my workplace? So what you discover is good workplace culture is normally built on two fundamental pillars. First one, really good evidence on all of these things. First one is something called psychological safety. The second one is something called positive affect. So psychological safety, really interesting lead into this. I'm mentioning Google again, and forgive me, it's just because this big piece of work was conducted by them. They built a people analytics team. When they hit about 75,000 people, they hired a people analytics team to try and work out what characterized their best recruits, and so they could hire for it. And what they discovered was their best recruits seemed to cluster. It's really strange. And then what they discovered was their best recruits had nothing that differentiated them, but were all in teams that had this thing that was pioneered by a researcher from Yale University called Amy Edmondson, called psychological safety. And psychological safety is this. Psychological safety is the thing that you've witnessed with your best ever client, the thing that you witnessed with your best ever boss, that ability to speak candidly to each other without fear of consequence, really, without fear of things going wrong. And so what you discover is that great organizations have got this psychological safety running through them, where people can speak transparently to each other, where they can speak, the way that Amy Edmondson describes it is, she says, for fear of appearing ignorant, we don't ask questions. I think we can recognize that. For fear of appearing obstructive, we don't raise objections. That's when you've got no psychological safety. So what happened at my place is that Twitter was having a nightmare. We were, dealing with the most formidable competitors that anyone's ever created. Facebook and Google, just like these phenomenon, incredible resource, making a load of money, had different morals than we had. So we were competing against them and really struggling. And my mistake was I thought I need to be telling people good news. And what you find is that you go along that for a short while, a bit like actually when we look at the different approaches to COVID around the world. There were some leaders who thought, my job is to be the cheerleader in chief. And there's other people who thought, Governor Cuomo in New York is a good example for me. Governor Cuomo said, it's bad, but it's going to get way worse. It's going to be so bad. Now, what happens there? People at least don't have this dissonance that the people working for me had, where on one hand, they were reading in the newspapers that things were bad. And on the other hand, they've got this brummy idiot telling them, don't worry, things are going to be all right by Christmas. Right. It's absence of psychological safety. The other thing, so I mentioned two pillars, psychological safety, positive affect. Second one is positive affect. And broadly, that is, it's very well researched area of psychology, and it's based on work by Martin Seligman. And it's the notion that the mood we're in affects the experience of life around us. The best example I could give you is, do you believe, the idea really that our decisions, our sociability, our willingness to collaborate, everything that we do is influenced by the mood we're in. Best example I can give you is that back to when you were a kid, did you think that there was a good time to ask your mum for something? Most of us knew there was a time to ask your mum. You might have it now with your partner, with your housemate. There was a good time to ask for something and a bad time to ask for something. You know, you could read the room. This is not going to get a good reception. And that's effectively what positive affect says. It says that when people are in, not necessarily sort of like necessarily a transparently good mood, but when they're in a positive frame of mind, they tend to respond in a different way. One example of it, a researcher called Alice Ison, she went into hospitals. She gave a gift to doctors. To half doctors, she gave a gift, half of them she didn't. The one she gave a gift to, when she gave them some medical case notes, they were more thorough in their diagnosis. They reached a more accurate conclusion than the one she didn't. And so you get this thing. Basically, the mood we're in affects the way we engage and we interact. Now, I think I just want to give one important clarification. By positive affect, it doesn't mean that these are people who are just going to say, great, everything's good. You know, because you remember that was my flaw at Twitter. So it's more that their frame of mind is positive looking. You know, things might be bad, but they're in a constructive frame of mind. They're in a sort of a good state of mind. So I think they're the critical things. And I know fundamentally that's what I did wrong at Twitter. I tried to tell people that everything was great. What you discover is people can handle some really bad news. And actually they love the sense of having a sense of control in that situation, but people can handle bad news. What they struggle with is being told good news and then having the dissonance of realizing it's not true. So I think that was my fundamental lesson there.
Right. So when we look in terms of the work, the way in which we're working, certainly the evidence seems to be suggesting that now we're working remotely, we're actually putting more hours into a day than less. Yeah. And therefore the conversation about burnout is one that's there. What is burnout?
Yeah, really good question. So firstly, you know, we were already talking about burnout, of course, the previous years. You know, this is nothing new. And it's largely because since we've had emails on our phones, and, you know, that's all of us, and there's a whole load of people who that's their whole experience of work. Since we've had email on our phones, the working day has gone up by 2 hours a day. We should have had Bob Crow or someone negotiating for us on it, because we've all casually done it. We've found ourselves sitting on the sofa answering an email at 8 o'clock, or, you know, answering an email at 7 in the morning. But the working day's gone up. In addition, this year, since we've been working at home, the working day's gone up by another 45 minutes. And what you discover about those things is that there's really strong evidence that sometimes a metaphor helps us connect with it, but there's really strong evidence that human energy isn't infinite, and definitely cognitive energy isn't infinite. If someone told you that the next Usain Bolt was training for the Olympics by training 100 hours a week, you know, even us without the experience of knowing how athletes train would go, that sounds a lot. That sounds a lot. Well, you know, and to some extent, we've got this idea in our head that when it comes to knowledge work, we can work infinitely, you know, and there's some illusions along the way. We've maybe worked late on a pitch, and we, you know, like we knew that burning the midnight oil was possible, or we might have worked at school or at college, working really late through the night. Of course, what we've deleted of both of those stories is the next day we went out on the smash, or the next day at college, we had 4 weeks holiday. You know, we sort of recharged our energy. Energy wasn't infinite. It was just, we used it very intensely, and then we had a period of recovery. You know, people who run the marathon don't run another marathon the next day and then another one the next day. And then, no, like rest and recovery. I think the critical thing about burnout is that thing where when we treat our energy as infinite, burnout is normally the consequence. So we can definitely put in hard stretches of intense work, you know, working right till the limit, but you just can't keep getting up and doing that again. And I think sometimes we've got an illusion that we believe we can do it. There was a really interesting quote I saw that I think sort of informs a lot of this. It was in a book by a guy called Daniel Levitin called The Organized Mind. It's a terrible book, but it's a sort of, it's a get stuff done book, but it's a really interesting summary of the science. He says, I remember this quote off by heart. He says, our brains are configured to make a certain number of decisions per day. And once we reach that limit, we're unable to make any more, regardless of how important they are. And like, to give you an illustration of that, you might have it. You get off a series of back-to-back Zoom calls, and then your housemate, your partner, whoever you share a house with, might ask you a question, and you're just like, I just need a minute, actually. I can't answer questions about that right now. Choosing something, I can't answer that. We just feel like our brains sort of are full of all this garbled information. And that's an example. Our brains just don't have an infinite capacity to keep going. And what you find is quite often, in lab conditions, if you test people in that situation, we often start, you do force yourself to do it, we often start making decisions that are entirely random. So you might find, I can do emails till midnight. But what you'll find is the quality of the thinking that goes into them is qualitatively different to when you start fresh at the start of a day's work. And you might witness this. You might be one of those people who sits with your email open. Maybe you've got a glass of wine or a cup of tea late at night and just thinking, I'm just going to clear my inbox. But I'll tell you, if you compare how quickly you answer those emails to if you go to bed, you get a good night's sleep, and then you open it the next day, and it'll be night and day. I mean, literally and metaphorically, it'll be completely different. Why? Because our brain does have this ability to renew itself. And I think the more that we don't acknowledge that, it's more the reason why we do end up feeling burnt out.
So in there, I mean, you've spoken a lot about resilience. And I think you've touched on a number of ways in which we can build up our own resilience. Do managers need to factor that into the way in which they manage their team?
Yeah, there's an interesting thing about resilience. So resilience is normally what we ask of other people, but we don't necessarily expect of ourselves. So I was in Beirut this summer. My partner's Lebanese, and I don't know if you saw that explosion in Beirut. I was in the middle of the summer. You might remember it from social media. There was an explosion that was the biggest peacetime explosion in any city in the world. It was like, if you see the footage of it, it looks like a nuclear bomb. I was there, and we were like a couple of miles away from it, and it shook the whole city. It was kind of terrifying. And there was something on the BBC that night that said, the BBC said, well, the Lebanese are regarded as very resilient people. And I saw someone in the local media the next day, and they said, we're fed up with being told we're resilient. We just want a degree of justice. We just want this misfortune to end. And quite often what we find, I heard Piers Morgan talking about young people need to be more resilient. I heard Robert Peston actually on the radio news a few weeks ago saying people need to be more resilient. And what we generally say is we want other people to be more resilient. When you look into people who are resilient, they generally feel connected to a network of people around. They feel like they've got support. It's very rare that you find someone who's resilient on their own. It's generally because they've got resources to draw upon. They feel confident in their ability to deal with things themselves. So, generally resilience is a collective strength rather than an individual strength. So as any of us are thinking about this right now, we should be thinking, okay, I want my team to respond in a resilient way. What am I doing to make them feel connected to their peer group? What am I doing to enable them to feel like they can go out and see some daylight while we've got a window into daylight? What am I doing to make them feel that they've got that power to do that, really? So I think, that's the critical thing I'd say. It does feel to be a collective strength rather than an individual one.
And when you talk about collective strength, I mean, I heard a comment you made, it was earlier today, on what I was listening to, about open plan offices, and actually the negative impact on them as opposed to the positive. But one way you describe it in terms of collective, that might seem to be able to foster it, but the evidence seems to suggest that they weren't very successful.
Yeah, the thing about open plan offices is that, while we might nostalgically reflect upon them now, the thing about open plan offices is that those of us who are in them used to spend, you'd have a bit of a chat with the people around you. You'd hear what they'd been watching the night before. You'd maybe sort of feel like as new arrivals arrived, you feel like I've done this chat. And then you'd pick up your stuff and you'd go off and you'd try and find a meeting room. You know very well that anytime you had a meeting room booked, the first thing that you're always greeted with was someone guiltily crouched over their laptop who said, "Oh, we've got this booked." Why? Because we all knew that there was sort of this collective dysfunction of open plan offices. You couldn't get anything done in them. And what you discover about things like that is that constant interruptions are not only incredibly frustrating, but we can never get into any state of concentration. If you're dealing with something complex, whether it's a response to a client, whether it's a proposal, whether it's a spreadsheet, if you're constantly interrupted, you never feel like you could get into that intense thinking that you need to do it. If you're trying to write a letter, I guarantee you can't do it when someone's interrupting you every half sentence. You need some space. And so that was the challenge with open plan offices. They look beautiful. If you want to say to someone, we've got a great buzz in this environment, walking them through your open plan office was a great way to do it. It looked like it's got loads of energy. There's a real buzz to the place. And definitely some of those things are true. But when it came to getting our jobs done, the reason why so many people report that they can get more done at home than they can at work, even if they're crouched on their sofa or they're sitting on their beds doing it, is because we just have far fewer interruptions. So I think critical thing about open plan offices, we can nostalgize about them as much as we want, but they just weren't very productive. Look, I think when we're thinking about what will offices look like, I think offices will probably look like a bit of WeWork, co-working spaces where there's probably a quiet table where people will plonk themselves down and the rule will be that you don't interrupt the people on the quiet table. There'll be people sort of with headphones on dotted around the office. Then there'll be meeting spaces and almost certainly the meeting spaces will be, and there might be places where people are just willing to chat. It's coffee place. If you're sitting here, you're signaling that you're willing to chat and engage. So I'm very strongly an advocate. I loved the office. For me, going home and I'd laughed with 12 different people was just life affirming. It was, we talk about the joy of work. It was my joy of work. Going home and I'd laughed all day was just, a genuine pleasure. But I think we'll probably access that in a slightly different way in the future.
But laughter is a big part of what you talk about, and you almost approach it in a negative way because you're talking about. I think there's a situation you're in where say things are doing really badly, so don't be seen about laughing. And actually it could have the opposite effect, which is if you laugh, then it creates a momentum of its own.
That's right. An old boss said to me, now's not the time to be seen laughing. We'd had some bad news. Business wasn't going well. We were in a bad way. And, the optics of being seen, it's a bit like when your football team's 1-0 down. Anyone who laughs on the bench will suddenly get social media going mad at them, thinking, don't they care? And it was very similar to that. My boss said to me, don't be seen laughing right now. What you discover about laughter, it's one of those strange things. When I was writing this book on workplace culture, and I was sort of reluctant to venture into laughter because it was such a defining part of what I loved about my job. Laughing with people, I was really happy with. What you discover about laughter is that I chatted to the world's leading expert on laughter, who passed away just 12 months ago now. And he said there was an interesting thing where he said there's around 100 academic papers on laughter, and there's around 75,000 academic papers on anxiety and depression. We sort of regard it as a bit frivolous to even talk about laughter. When people have got serious medical conditions, to be looking into laughter seems to be, haven't you got any serious work to do? But he said there's a strange thing about laughter is that firstly, the point of laughter, the evolutionary objective of laughter was to forge links with other people. He said it sort of forms, really fascinating. He said it serves the same purpose as birdsong forms in birds. It forms connections with each other. We tend to laugh more in groups than individually. We tend to laugh when we're around other people. We laugh more with people we like than people we don't like. So, you know, if you find yourself at Christmas, I can't guarantee that we're going to have Christmas, but normally if you're around your mates, your best friends, you'll laugh a lot, because it's this signal of togetherness. But it also signals another thing. It signals safety. Maybe that's one and the same thing. So, if you've ever watched two dogs encountering each other, dogs do this strange thing, which is sort of clearly programmed into them. They do downward dog. If dogs are sort of playing with each other and one goes to bite the other one's tail, they'll often put their front two legs down, and it's regarded by sort of a psychologist. It's a signal that they're signaling to each other, this is all a joke, this is all fun, this is all safe. And laughter seems to signal the same with humans. We only laugh with people that we trust. If you're if the police pull you over and you feel like an imminent sense of peril, you don't start laughing. It's programmed that we laugh when things are safe. And what you discover is through all of these things. So what does laughter do? It signals togetherness. It's really good for resilience, for firefighters talk about, we laugh all the time. And, I chatted to a firefighter. He said, I said, do you chat to your partner about what you laugh about? And he said, if I told my wife what I laugh about, she'd probably want to divorce me. She probably would, they laugh about bleak things. Soldiers laugh a lot. I chatted to someone who ran a field hospital, was in a field hospital in Count Bastion. And he said, if you witnessed what went on in that field hospital, and then if I told you that the thing I most associate with it is laughter, he said you wouldn't be able to connect those two things. But we tend to use laughter to forge that togetherness, to signal sort of this safety there. So laughter, back to me, my old boss wandering past saying, now's not the time to be seen laughing. It was probably just about the worst advice you could give. Laughter seems to be one of the things, and probably we all recognize it a bit. Laughter seems to be one of those things that when we laugh, we do feel that we can cope with the world in a bit better way. We do feel like we're not in this on our own. So laughter does seem to have this sort of superpower to it.
Yeah. And I want to get people to ask some questions, because I'm sure there's some things which are burning. So whilst they're preparing some of their questions to throw at you, Bruce, I just want to touch on, because you talk about laughter and putting people together, but equally your relationship with sport, or the work that you're doing and building high performance teams in sport. There's a lot to be learnt from that, and diversity, and having different people within a team to be able to create high performance. How can you add to that? What are our learnings from sport?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Sport can be a comfortable comparison point, but it isn't always exactly the same. So, sport, we can learn some things from it. I did anyone who's a sport fan, I've not done a lot of podcasts on sport, but I did a couple. I did one on the Barcelona culture and the Pep Guardiola, and then I did one about the Liverpool culture and Jurgen Klopp, loads of clips of him in it, sort of discussion of how he built the culture there. And he built the culture there based on a strong sense of psychological safety, a strong sense of team cohesion. So your first thing that he did when he went to Liverpool is he joined Liverpool. At their training ground, Melwood, there's about 100 people who work there, and he learned everyone's name. And when everyone came back, is it Melrose or Melwood? I don't know. Liverpool fans will be annoyed. I've got it wrong. But when everyone came back from the break, he stood and he lined up everyone, from the woman who serves your lunch to the man who washes the kit. And he introduced them all by names. And he said, we're all one team here. Everyone's the team. And we call each other by our first names. And it's an important signal of moving from sort of individuality into collectiveness. We're all in this. This is a team event and we're all part of the team. Really important signal. and he had a sort of a pretty clear tactical plan that he was working to. But really sort of important. But what you learn, sport isn't always a perfect metaphor for business. Some of the reasons why it's not is the feedback loop's much quicker in sport than it is in business. You get sort of your results at the end of the week and you have to adapt to them. Whereas the results, that's in sport, whereas the results in business, it often takes a bit longer. It's not always directly clear the contributing parts to success or failure. And, we can't, teams have ups and downs. They can manage their energy. If we fall into the mistake of doing that at work, we can sort of expect people to be on all the time. We don't have the clear intentional ups and downs. So it's not always exactly the same. One thing we do know from sport, and it's why sometimes data is more helpful than anecdote. What we do know from sport is that the best coaches are statistically, we're also the best players. And I know that that's not always the case when we anecdotally look at things, that we might go, hang on, well, that guy didn't play very well. That guy wasn't an elite player. But generally, when we look statistically, the best players, the best coaches understood what they are coaching people in. So they understood elite performance. So when it comes to work, if you're putting someone in charge of something and they don't know that department, statistically, that's a flaw. You want someone in a department who knows how that department works. You can get over it with empathy and, learning, but, appointing someone to run a track and trace program who has zero experience of running track or trace, I would suggest is statistically flawed. I would say that's what the evidence would say there.
All right. Can I just call? We've got a question. Andrew Christophers, you want to talk about business culture and maybe its relationship with sport. Do you want to come off mute, Andrew?
Yeah. No, thanks, Clive. And thanks, Bruce. I was just, I love the sport analogy and the Jurgen Klopp, and it is Melwood, not Melrose.
I knew I'd get it right.
Connections are brilliant that Klopp has. And you said earlier, and I think this is particularly true for people on this call, probably as Alliance of Independents, that culture is our superpower. And I agree with that entirely. I'm at Brand Genetics, business I know you know, and we've dealt with you before. But just if culture is our superpower, what 3 words would you use to define a great business culture?
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things is that, we can often find that culture at one place can be identical to somewhere else. And, we can believe ourselves that we have a big cultural difference to somewhere, but you might hire someone and they go, yeah, it's about the same here as it was there. So we can sometimes, the narcissism of marginal differences it's called, but we can sometimes overestimate the differences. What you discover is there are some things that drive high performance and people feeling connected to their jobs. And I think, a sense of autonomy is really critical. The sense that you can, effectively that you can have an impact on your job. I think psychological safety is really critical. That sense that you can speak candidly to each other. And as I mentioned, it's probably the best to perceive it with clients, actually, because, the old truism is that clients get the work they deserve. And, we know that there's some clients where you can't say what you honestly think to them, or you can't get an honest brief out of them and so that's psychological safety, but it's also very critical at work. So I would say autonomy, psychological safety, probably the sense that people have a voice in the organization, maybe a reflection of the others, but people feeling like they can have a say. I think, probably they're off the top of my head 3 things that I would say.
Terrific. Thank you.
Okay. John Toppin, you want to talk about life before we go back to the office? You're on mute, John.
Bruce, it may be some months before many people can get back in the office and enjoy the network effect. What are the 3 most important things you suggest managers can do to keep staff productive and happy?
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things is that we can find it dehumanizing if we're just in big Zoom calls all the time. So, you know, finding, I chatted to someone who was the boss of a primary goods manufacturer, miner, and they he said he used to spend 2 or 3 days a week on aeroplanes traveling to places to stand up in the front of the room. He said, I've just spent some of that time gathering groups of 3 or 4 people, junior people in the firm, and just chatting to them. He said, because to some extent it replaces those chats that you used to have near the lifts, or the chat that you'd have in pret-a-manger as you bumped into each other. It sort of replaces a bit of that, but also makes those people feel that they do have a connection into the power of the organization. They do have, you know, they can wander past the boss's desk metaphorically and know that they've been noticed. I think, you know, one of the most important things we know about work is that we'll often work hard if our work is noticed. If it feels like our work isn't noticed and doesn't count for anything, we lose motivation. We lose a sense that this matters. You know, if we do something and no one pays any comment to it, gradually over time, we think, well, what's the point? What's the point doing that? So I think, you know, finding some way so that you do more junior people, or even, you know, might be senior people, but they feel like their work is being noticed and they, and it is mattering. I think that is going to be a critical part. I chatted to one organization who'd, a few organizations actually who've created community managers. And I think, you know, in this, you might have had HR do it before, you might have had the office manager doing it before, your receptionist might have done it to some extent, but someone who sort of acted to create a bit of cohesion. You know, they were the person who got a cake for someone's birthday, or they got those things. And a few people are giving the responsibility of that to someone in the office, saying, look, you know, can you have a responsibility? Now, sometimes I chatted to someone who's doing it for a big firm, and she said, sometimes it's not about creating one big collective community, but it's making sure that all the parents in the firm feel like they're in a group together. All the people who, you know, are from minority ethnic groups, of specific groups, they're in a group together. So they just feel like their personal lived experience is just something that they've got someone to talk to about it. You know, definitely parents are an obvious one, but during the first part of lockdown, people who did have kids going feral in the next room, obviously we sort of had like this exponential stress compared to the rest of the company, and just having someone that you can talk to about that seems to be an important thing to deal with it. Right now, I'd be thinking, you know, where we're going to get into is that there's going to be clearly a new world, and making people feel that you're going to reach those decisions, how to make that work, with a degree of everyone having a voice in it, I think will be a really important part right now. So, you know, it might well be that you say, look, just want to talk to everyone. We're working on the basis that sometime between April and June, we're going to be fully back to normal, but we want you to all play a part in shaping what that normal looks like. And, you know, and we're not making any decisions. We're going to experiment. But the spirit we're going to be experimenting with is that the experiments we finally conclude on might be the ones that you don't agree with, but we're entering into this, as in the team members might not agree with, but we're entering into this because we're going to create a new version of our culture that is going to be good across the organization. Because no doubt what we find is that the people who most enjoy working from home, I might have mentioned this at the outset, are the people who've got home offices, who are in the older cohorts in offices. They've quite enjoyed it. They've, like, you know, they've got these more agreeable surroundings. And so if you ask them, most of them will say, I want to work in the office 1 day a week. Probably most of us recognize that from the business point of view, 1 day a week of people in the office isn't the right balance. And so we're not going to please them. There's going to be something that they don't like, but it's about trying to reach an agreement that is broadly is good for everyone. So I think, you know, making people feel like they've got a say in that is going to be quite critical.
Okay. Chris Westlake, who I can't see, but you're somewhere around. You want to explore the power of being in person versus the screen?
Hi, Bruce. How you doing?
How you doing?
Good. James, I had a question about kind of, the industry that we work in, creative marketing, the agency business, for years and years predicated on the power of the face-to-face to generate ideas, certainly for creative departments spending hours and hours in the pub, brainstorming, thinking and ideas around creative solutions to challenges that clients put on our plates. Clearly that's the whole COVID things have affected that. And I just wondered what your thoughts were around whether that same camaraderie and collective thinking can be achieved through a screen, and how an agency culture can continue to operate in that sort of vibrant, sort of idea generating way in this new world.
Well, I think the evidence suggests that certainly for the generation of people that we're dealing with now, and that includes to Generation Z, that nothing is a perfect substitute for face-to-face. That we seem to read micro expressions from people when we're in a room with them. So, that thing that, people generally reveal what they really think instantly, but then they adapt it to try and sort of project what we notice that in a meeting room. We don't notice that on a Zoom call. And most of the evidence suggests that working face-to-face with people is fundamentally different. We do connect with people with, a far more animalistic sense face-to-face. I am impressed when I hear of organizations. I chatted to another one yesterday who've hired loads of people in lockdown, never having met them in real life, because we all know sort of viscerally we've got something changes when you meet someone in real life that you don't necessarily get through a screen. But so, so I know those things are true, but I think we can be a degree rose tinted about what the day-to-day experience of the office was like. I suspect if someone asked you to watch back your January this year in the office, you probably were sitting at your desk a lot of the time, not chatting to anyone, answering emails, not necessarily living that sort of Marrakesh market of negotiation and exchanging ideas that you probably sometimes imagine. And so I think that's the critical thing. What I have done is I have chatted to firms who've got to 2 days a week in the office, 3 days a week in the office. And they say, we have like a very connected time where people are chatting to each other. They have lunch with each other. It's like loads of ideas pop in, but they do get the benefit of working, clearing all their emails, writing that report they need to write on the Friday, whatever it is. So I think probably it's a bit like, open plan offices. If we remember back to open plan offices, we'll probably remember a time that someone opened a bottle of something or someone had some cake. We all were having a right laugh. Actually, the average experience of the open plan office wasn't that for most of the time. So I think it's about trying to be honest about what bits really, what do we need to do to keep the good bits? You don't need to have Christmas lunch every day to have the glory of the relationships that you get from a Christmas lunch.
Okay, we're coming to the end, so I just want to kind of finish off, I suppose, from an alliance point of view, for two things. One, the idea in terms of working in groups. It's fundamental to the way in which we operate. We have, under our pillars of people, purpose and performance, we've got 9 action groups, and we're very keen that those action groups get together peers from different businesses. So you've got different cultures coming to try and tackle the same problem. And I think from one of the things you're saying, I think that can be a benefit. And secondly, the other principle that we have is a successful agency is a happy agency, or a happy agency is a successful agency. Do you think those two kind of things sum up that maybe that we're doing it the right way, that having these groups and trying to promote happiness by looking after the well-being of people ahead of everything else is the right way to go?
Yeah, I mean, look, from my perspective, from the outside, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. The focus on that is half the journey is sort of having the destination of going there. Absolutely.
Yeah. So look, Bruce, we're coming to the end. Thank you very much indeed for the insights and the loquaciousness of the way in which you've tackled it all. I would really encourage all of you to listen to Eat, Sleep, Work, Repeat, and read the blogs and the notes. Somebody's put on the chat about, can we put up the references? If you sign up to Bruce's blog and newsletter, he provides all the references that you need, and I would strongly recommend that you do that, because we really just touched on the surface.
Lisa's asked that there. If she links into me, I'll give her the specific references for all of those things.
Yeah.
Or I'll send them to the group afterwards. But absolutely.
Yeah. If you send the group, we can share them. Yeah. Absolutely, we can share those around. Those will be really good. But
anyone can link into me if you've got any questions. Absolutely.
Yeah. It's there's an awful lot there, and I try to, have listened to a lot of it, to go through your greatest hits of the topics that you've covered. But there's a whole lot more to delve into. So Bruce, thank you very much indeed. I hope everybody else has a very good evening, and join us all again very soon.